and go to this presentation, and then you could just click on those links to your heart's content and go explore all the wonderful things that were super, super secret when I did them, but now they're out there on the internet for anybody to look at. So this is basically what we're going to be going through, and I have about 40 charts until I run out of steam. If you need to get up and go to the restroom or something, that's fine. I won't be insulted. But we're going to be covering an introduction to the Cold War, why the SR-71 showed up, and the design that caused us to have to come up with a special refueling tanker just for the SR-71, because that's what I know about. Other times there's SR-71 pilots and crew members and maintenance folks here, and they'll talk about the SR-71. I'm talking about in-flight refueling and that technology and that mission and some of the stories that I have from doing it. So, let's start. So, it's all about me. I grew up in 1952, 50s and early 60s. I might even mention that my dad was in the European theater in World War II. He was a gunner on B-24s. This is the B-24 book. And there's a B-24 out here in the museum. Unfortunately, the one that they were able to get from the museum does not have a ball turret on it. He was a ball turret gunner. And so if you go over to the B-17 over in the other corner, there's a ball turret that's almost exactly the same as the one that was in the B-24. And if you might try to imagine a person fitting inside that, I'll just say my dad was about this tall and very thin. And he was able to crawl in there just barely. Very scary, exciting mission. And my namesake, his brother, my Uncle Charles, he was in the naval battles in the Pacific in World War II. He was in every major naval battle in the Pacific. If that stuff interests you, I have a blog on my dad and a blog on my uncle on my Blogspot address where you can read through what they did in World War II. But basically, I'm saying all that to say I'm a child of a baby boom generation where my dad and my uncle fought in World War II, and that very much was in my mind as I grew up, and I knew about those things. World War II was a recent event. People were still mourning the dead. The Cold War era was 47 to 1991. Frankly, I feel like we're still in the Cold War because the Russians still have all their missiles and bombers. We still have our missiles and bombers, so I'm not sure what's different. There's a wall that went down in Berlin, but you know, I still don't trust the Russians. Well, maybe if we have enough missiles and bombs, then I'll trust them. But I did grow up like all the other people in my generation, learning how to duck and cover, because we had learned during World War II that two big oceans were not enough to protect the United States from missiles and bombs. We were in a new era where anybody in the world could be attacked from anybody else in the world if they had the right technology, and that was missiles and bombers. So we didn't know a lot in the 50s and 60s about how all that might play out or how effective atomic bombs were. A lot of people are still really sick, of course, from some of the experiments that occurred. And if you haven't heard about the downwinders here living in Utah, you ought to look up that whole era of our history. But it was also an age of technological marvels. This is a computer from the late 50s. It had all of 1K of memory, had 5,000 vacuum tubes. It was called the Whirlwind. And this, of course, is the X-15, one of the early rocket planes, a precursor to something like an SR-71 or something like a space shuttle. And the early ICBMs that we were trying to figure out how to build. The technological explosion was coming up in terms of learning how to make bombs smaller, missiles and aircraft bigger and more capable. And I've got another book here called Beyond the Limits. And this is all about the history of making computers small enough to fly aboard airplanes or even in missiles. Whole history there of the technological explosions of the time. People talk about putting a man on the moon. If we could put a man on the moon, why can't we? Well, we put a man on the moon through our whole space program in parallel with developing thousands of ICBMs to protect the nation. 7 major technological breakthroughs had to occur